Good evening. Slobodan Milosevic's face said it all. After 13 years during which he's led his country to defeat after defeat in war, crippled its economy but grown rich from corruption, today he faced the fact that it was all over. In case he had any final doubts, the Russian foreign minister came to call at his heavily guarded compound just outside Belgrade and told him so. At the same time, Yugoslavia's constitutional court was confirming that Vojislav Koštunica had won last week's election and is Yugoslavia's new president. One of his first actions was to release 2 British policemen held for 10 weeks by the Milosevic regime on spying charges. Our first report is from the BBC's World Affairs editor John Simpson, who is in Belgrade.
Belgrade, day 2 of the revolution. And the city has turned into a huge demonstration, with one just merging into the next. It's what they always tried to do in the past, but never quite managed. One or other opposition leader always seemed to fall out of line, and the whole thing collapsed. But that was the past, and the past was another country.
What we're witnessing here is the birth of a new country. A Serbia that wants to be open to the outside world instead of treated like some international pariah. And a Serbia which wants to be free in economic terms as well, free of all the manipulation and corruption which always seem to come when the state runs everything.
This afternoon we caught our first tantalizing glimpse of Slobodan Milosevic in defeat, welcoming the Russian Foreign Minister Mr. Ivanov to the Belgrade villa, where he's apparently spent the entire crisis. He didn't, after all, fly abroad or go to eastern Serbia. You could see the strain in his face, but he doesn't quite seem to understand what's happened to him. He told Mr. Ivanov he wanted to play a role in political life here still. Unthinkable, of course, though as Vojislav Koštunica, the man who's taken his place, quietly and calmly explained his own position, it did begin to look as though no immediate action might be taken against Mr. Milosevic after all. That could stir up the army and the police too much and make them nervous about reprisals. Still, there are reminders everywhere of what Mr. Milosevic did, and the ground outside the Parliament building is littered with some of them. When the crowd took over the building yesterday, they found hundreds, perhaps thousands, of fraudulent ballot papers from the election 12 days ago, all carefully filled in by dutiful bureaucrats, and all, of course, in favour of Mr. Milosevic. It was a trick which has always worked in the past, but this time was once too often. Rigging the election was what brought him down. Already some injustices are being undone. The 2 British policemen who spent 67 days in jail wrongly accused of espionage, John Yore and Adrian Prangnell, were released today. They'd been on secondment in Kosovo.
I think probably going to the first bar that we can find, have a very large drink to celebrate what is a stupendously wonderful day for us. Thank you.
Liam Hall, one of the 2 Canadians arrested on similarly trumped-up charges, was freed too, and his colleague's release is expected soon. But yesterday's wasn't entirely another velvet revolution carried out in peace and love. There was a darker side to it. When the crowd torched the government's television station RTS, it was partly from revenge. During last year's NATO bombing campaign, the management ordered the staff to stay at their posts, even though it knew NATO was planning to bomb the station. 16 people died when it happened 18 months ago. Yesterday, the Director General of RTS was forced out of the building by the flames and savagely beaten. The crowd believed he had wanted his staff to die because it made good pro-Milosevic propaganda in the NATO campaign. His beating up was an ugly business which marred the whole record of the revolution. Otherwise, only one person actually died, and that was an accident. But what happened to the head of RTS shows the hatred there still is for the Milosevic system. But the vast majority of the demonstrators have been entirely peaceable. Their hope is that everything's going to be easier from now on, and their country will be respected in the world as it was before Slobodan Milosevic came to power. It'll probably take longer than they hope, but it will surely come. John Simpson, BBC News, Belgrade.
Well, estimates of just how many people took to the streets yesterday vary, but it could have been as many as 500,000. They came from all over Serbia for what was intended to be the climax of 8 days of industrial action. Instead, they brought down a president. Gavin Hewitt has been out on the streets of Belgrade hearing firsthand why they did it.
The day after a revolution, and the streets echo to the sounds of whistles and car horns. Students had been at the forefront of the attack on President Milosevic's symbols of power, and with victory assured, many seemed less concerned about whether he left the country or not.
Actually, for me, I don't care about him. I care about me, my family, and my future.
But some found it hard to believe their revolution was complete, while Mr. Milosevic was still somewhere in the country receiving guests.
Not just great because nothing is over yet, because we don't know where is Milosevic.
This evening, many of the crowds who had been on the streets yesterday came to the St. Sava Church to pray for peace. These were not people driven by a revolutionary agenda. Time and again they told us they just wanted a normal life, to live in a country without shame and isolation.
I think that all is about a normal and a new life in our country.
Above all, people want an end to policies that saw 3 Balkan wars that made refugees across Croatia, Bosnia and Kosovo.
Tonight, the streets of Belgrade are crowded once again, people reveling in their newfound freedom. And the strongest impression is the absence of any desire for vengeance, either towards President Milosevic or his inner circle.
So, for the moment, there's no talk of bringing to justice those who brought ethnic cleansing to this part of Europe. It's not that kind of upheaval. It's not about addressing the stain of the past. This is more about a people just yearning to have basic freedoms for themselves. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Belgrade.
So, what do we know of the man newly installed as president? Václav Kostunica has held together Serbia's disparate opposition parties and taken power with little opposition. Western leaders have offered friendship and cooperation, but what will the 56-year-old lawyer do with his newfound power? As our World Affairs correspondent David Shukman reports, the West could find that its overtures receive only a guarded welcome.
Vojislav Kostunica suddenly finds himself transformed from unknown professor of law to leader of one of the largest and most troubled countries in the Balkans. He embodies the spirit of revolution, but no one's asking too closely what that revolution will actually mean. Last night on television, he made what appears to be a simple and welcome statement. I have a vision, he said, of normal relations with other countries, but this won't be simple, Mr. Kostunica warned, because of the countries that sinned against us, that bombed us last year. Britain was one of those, of course, and today the Prime Minister was offering friendship.
Whatever our quarrel with the oppressive and odious regime of Milosevic, it was never a quarrel with the Serbian people. And we want to make sure that as Serbia reaches for democracy, we are there giving them a helping hand.
The first help will be to repair the damage of the NATO bombing and of the long years of sanctions. On Monday, the EU plans to lift those sanctions and unlock a huge package of aid, but there may be strings attached. Here at the Foreign Office, they say the priority is now to help the Serb people, but it's not quite as simple as that, because Britain and other Western governments believe that if Serbia wants to be a member of the European family, it must behave like one. And that means 2 things. First, arresting Slobodan Milosevic, and second, not causing trouble with Serbia's neighbours. War crimes investigators were in Kosovo today, pressing the case for Mr. Milosevic to be handed over. The investigators know Serbia's new leader has refused to do this. It's the first source of tension.
I truly believe that this is the only solution if there is to be a true and lasting peace in the Balkans, and if the people of Yugoslavia are to enjoy a democratic existence.
That's what the outside world is hoping for as it watches this revolution in the Balkans. The focus will be on Montenegro and how Mr. Kostunica responds to its demands for independence, and on Kosovo, now under NATO control. Slobodan Milosevic had played the Serb nationalist card for over a decade, and many Serbs loved him for it. His successor is just as ardent, and even thought Mr. Milosevic was sometimes too soft.
No one's expecting Mr. Kostunica to be a pushover, to curl up and be friendly to the West. After all, he's been intensely critical of NATO's bombing raids over Kosovo. But he's going to be a man they can probably do business with.
Mr. Kostunica inherits a country traumatized by war and uneasy about receiving help from the countries that bombed it. He won the revolution and now has to handle the aftermath. David Shookman, BBC News.
Well, our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, joins us now live from Belgrade. John, let's consider first the future of Slobodan Milosevic, still in Serbia, as we've seen today. What do you think this new administration is going to do with him?
Well, I must say at first I thought they'd arrest him straight away. I now begin to wonder whether that is actually going to happen immediately. I think the difficulties of arresting him might be, at this moment at any rate, might be to create all sorts of trouble with the army and the police, frighten them with the thought that there were going to be witch hunts in which they might be involved. So I think it is possible that Mr. Kostunica will hang on with that, keep him under some kind of loose control, perhaps in this villa where he's been in Belgrade the whole time, and then see what he can do after that. What he won't do, I think, is extradite him to The Hague, no matter what happens, simply because it happens to be against the constitution of Yugoslavia, and he's a constitutional lawyer. He believes in following the letter of these things.
Mr. Milosevic said that he wanted to remain active in politics at one point today, but so long as he is there at large in Serbia, he is potentially a problem, isn't he?
Well, I don't think he's a problem in the sense that he's a sort of focus for opposition or anything like that in any serious way, because he's such a discredited figure that I don't think that would be a problem. It's absolutely ludicrous as far as I can see, and as far as everybody I've spoken to in this country thinks that he should have any role whatever to play politically. I mean, he's just a totally discredited outsider. But whether and what precisely in what condition rather he's kept is another question.
And how easy or otherwise do you think it is going to be for the rest of the world now to deal with Mr. Kostunica?
Oh, I don't think that'll be difficult at all. Yes, it's true that he's quite nationalistic on some things. He does have problems about the constitution and sending Yugoslav citizens to external courts and so on. But he's essentially a moderate figure with a great many more moderate figures, even more moderate figures alongside him in this strange 19-party coalition which swept to power. And so I don't think we're looking at a kind of, in any sense, a Milosevic Part 2 or a sort of half Milosevic type figure. I think we're looking at an altogether new type of man here. I think he's just simply a conservative. I think he'll be very easy, in fact, for the West to deal with. And frankly, he's going to need their help absolutely desperately. He's not going to play games.
John Simpson in Belgrade. Thank you very much indeed. Now to today's other news, and there's been another day of bloodshed in the Middle East. At least 8 more Palestinians have been killed and dozens injured in running battles with Israeli security forces in Jerusalem, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Militant Palestinian groups declared it a day of rage. Our special correspondent Ben Brown watched the worst of the violence unfold in Jerusalem's Old City.
Friday prayers in Jerusalem. At first they looked peaceful enough, but there were always fears they could spark off yet more fighting, and they did. Palestinians emerged from their worship, many of them clutching rocks. They were about to start a riot. They began by tearing down security cameras within the walls of the old city. For them, small but hated symbols of Israeli authority. Then they set about attacking an Israeli police station. Several officers were trapped inside, besieged by the rioters. With increasing desperation, the policemen fired out tear gas, trying to drive back the protesters. It didn't work. The Palestinians kept inching closer. They even managed to break the lock so the policemen couldn't escape. A fire was now burning inside, and I could hear them screaming for help. Israeli reinforcements arrived and tried to shoot open the police station door. Still, they couldn't get in, so they had a go at smashing it down with brute force. Colleagues provided covering fire, while Palestinians kept up their onslaught. Eventually, the trapped Israeli policemen staggered out, spluttering from the smoke. They'd been lucky to escape with their lives.
The Palestinians had promised this would be a day of rage, and they've been true to their word. Once again, they've unleashed a wave of violence. These Israeli troops are trying to quell it, but it looks like this new uprising shows no sign of abating.
This latest battle of Jerusalem raged inside and outside the ancient walls of the Holy City. Often the Palestinians and the Israelis were within just a few yards of each other, and they fought throughout the afternoon. These young Palestinians are frustrated by a peace process they believe is going nowhere. They rained rocks down on the Israeli security forces. The Israelis took what cover they could and then hit back with rubber bullets and sometimes live ones. The Israelis took casualties, but as usual, the Palestinians took many more. Once again, blood has been spilt at a place that is sacred to both Muslims and Jews. Ben Brown, BBC News, Jerusalem.
The Prime Minister has delivered what's being described as his most important speech on Europe since taking office. In an address to Eastern European political leaders in Warsaw, Mr. Blair said it was important for the EU to be a superpower, not a superstate. From the Polish capital, our political editor, Andrew Marr.
From World War II to the collapse of communism, Poland's fight for statehood and independence was honoured today by Tony Blair, here laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Warsaw. Now Poland is anxious to join the European Union, and Tony Blair is keen to help. But in his most important speech on Europe so far, the Prime Minister asked if Europe must mean a federal superstate.
Nations like Poland, who struggled so hard to achieve statehood, whose citizens shed their blood in that cause, are not going to give it up lightly. So we should celebrate our diverse cultures and identities, our distinctive attributes as nations. Such a Europe can, in its economic and political strength, be a superpower. A superpower, but not a super state.
But how do we get there? Mr. Blair proposed a new lead by Europe's national leaders, seizing the initiative from the Brussels Commission, and not a US-style constitution, but an informal one.
What I think is desirable and realistic is to draw up a statement of the principles according to which we should decide what is best done at the European level and what should be done at the national level, a kind of charter of competences.
And that charter would be enforced by a new European Senate made up of national MPs. Is this British initiative enough to close Europe's democratic gap? The Poles are eager to join, but the Euro's in trouble and the people of the EU are becoming impatient. Warsaw today feels like any other European capital, prosperous and free, and the Poles want more of that. But the problem for Poland and for Britain is how do you ensure the riches, the security and the global influence the EU says it represents without getting stuck in an undemocratic superstate? Tony Blair's answers here today will be hugely controversial, but they are at least a response to that central riddle at the heart of the European dream. Andrew Marr, BBC News, Warsaw.
Detectives have charged a 44-year-old man with the murder of the Staffordshire student Heather Tell. The body of the 17-year-old dance student, who was buried today, was found in a park at Tamworth in August. A post-mortem revealed she'd been strangled. A man has appeared before magistrates in Cornwall charged with the murders of his wife and 4 stepchildren. 33-year-old Lee Ford was remanded in custody. Police found 3 bodies in the family's garden shed yesterday. 2 more were discovered today in a nearby field. Kenneth Noy, the man jailed for the road rage stabbing on the M25, is to be questioned about the murder of a man who gave key evidence against him. Alan de Cabral was shot in the head as he sat in a car in Ashford in Kent yesterday.
Alan de Cabral was killed with a single shot to the head. He was sitting in a car as his son went into these shops. Witnesses said a suspect wearing a light green sweater was seen running from the scene. Detectives are not ruling out the possibility it was the work of a professional hitman. But the officer leading the inquiry is looking at a number of theories.
What we're urging the public and the media not to do is to jump to any conclusions. What we are finding is that the more we investigate this crime, the more complicated it becomes.
Mr. de Cabrel was a key witness in the trial of London gangster Kenneth Noy, who was convicted of murdering a young electrician. But he refused police protection during and after the trial. He told the court that he saw the glint of the knife in the sun and then witnessed the stabbing on this slip road on the M25 at Swanley in Kent. He lived in this village deep in the countryside, and after the case he told the BBC that he was too frightened to speak out because of possible reprisals.
Local people have been reluctant to speak publicly, but it's understood Mr. de Cabrel had links to the criminal underworld: gun running, drugs, car ringing and bootlegging.
The fingertip search for clues continued today. Officers realise it could be a long investigation. Local people said Mr. de Cabrel was friendly, but he also had many enemies. Any one of them could have killed him. Stephen Cape, BBC News, Pluckley.
A woman who was wrongly diagnosed with breast cancer has been awarded more than £300,000 in compensation. Jennifer Cormack had to endure 14 operations, including a double mastectomy and a hysterectomy, before she discovered that she didn't have cancer at all.
Good girl.
Jennifer Cormack has rebuilt her life after undergoing a devastating and unnecessary catalogue of operations. For a decade she thought she had cancer and had just years to live. Today the High Court awarded her £345,000 compensation.
It's just been one saga of disasters after disasters. And for anyone to live with that for no reason, bad enough to live with it for a valid reason, but for no reason whatsoever, I think it's absolutely appalling.
It was a pathologist at the Royal London Hospital who made what were described as indefensible and serious errors of diagnosis. That pathologist was named as Professor Sir Colin Berry, a pillar of the medical establishment. This is the second time that a serious misdiagnosis by Professor Sir Colin Berry has ended up here at the High Court. Last year, in an almost identical case, a woman was awarded £500,000 compensation. She'd also had both breasts removed and undergone a total of 21 surgical procedures. Jennifer Cormack says she's considering reporting Sir Colin to the General Medical Council, which could take disciplinary action. Fergus Walsh, BBC News at the High Court.
A ball will be kicked at Wembley for the last time tomorrow when England meet Germany in a World Cup qualifier. The Twin Towers will tumble for the development of a new stadium. Although most famous for England's World Cup triumph in 1966, Wembley has also played host to the Olympics and FA and Rugby League Cup finals. Our sports correspondent Kevin Geary looks back down Wembley Way.
Right to the 11th hour, Wembley has been playing host to dreams. Of course, for most, they'll wither on the vine of reality. But not for all.
And it means England are the world champions.
That summer's day in 1966 marks, for Englishmen at least, Wembley's crowning moment. But down the decades since its chaotic opening in the famous White Horse final of 1923, it's meant so much to so many, the very name conjures up myriad tinted images of sporting history. The 1948 Austerity Olympics, with Dutch housewife Fanny Blankers-Koen winning 4 gold medals.
There's the man who's really fighting for his cup medal. Could he score the winning
The Stanley
goal
Matthews
now?
final of 1953 and belated glory for football's greatest gentleman. Right through to the Technicolor moments when his antithesis, Paul Gascoigne, chose the Wembley stage to leave a bittersweet reminder of a wasted talent. Mere snapshots really from a vast, rich gallery, but all adding to the aura that is the place's essence.
I thought it was magic, really. I travelled all over the world and I never played anywhere where I felt so comfortable and happy and right. I used to feel that Wembley was right. You know, this is the right place to hold really big games.
The England players will certainly have history littering their path when they return to Wembley tomorrow to face Germany, but the man leading them will have his focus on the future.
It's very special and one I'm particularly proud of, but it is 3 points and I'm a professional on that. overall said and done, that's the thing that I'm going to try and achieve, is the 3 points, because there's no point us going out there saying this is a wonderful thing and I'm so proud to be out there and not getting my job done.
And here comes Hurst, he's got...
And playing the Germans in the World Cup could hardly be a better finale. This may not have been the finest goal the old place ever saw, but its significance will remain when Wembley's reduced to rubble. Bulldozers can demolish concrete, but not memories. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
The main news tonight, huge crowds have once again been out on the streets of Belgrade as Yugoslavia celebrates the overthrow of Slobodan Milosevic. And while we've been on the air, it's been reported that the country's new leader, Václav Kostunica, has been meeting army chiefs and that he has had a face-to-face encounter with Mr. Milosevic. The next news is on News 24 at 10 o'clock, but from the BBC 9 o'clock news, good night.